Brinkworth, who I'm professionally I can't. She'll have to introduce herself because I've tried about 5 times and I've got it wrong.
He's only known me for 150 years and he still doesn't bloody know what I've done.
She sort of works in medical stuff. Yeah.
So I guess I'm here as because I have a clinical medical background, although very much a generalist. And I guess I've been involved in the sport for 20 odd years, done a little bit of coaching, been on either a club or a state board for 20 years, and I'm a TO, so I guess I have a reasonable appreciation as overall about what the hell goes down in our sport. So I've got quite a long brief as to what I'm supposed to cover, and other people need to come on and talk as well, so I've only got so much time to do an awful lot. So first of all, just get a bit of a, who's here is just a TO, not shouldn't say just, only a TO, only a coach, both? Yeah. Alrighty, so we've got a lot of cross-pollination with that. Okay, so we have, so we all have other lives beyond all that. Who's a doctor? Who's a nurse? Who's a physio? Alrighty, so a few other allied healthcare professionals. And out of the coaches, entry-level, level 1 coaching? Most. And anybody that does any higher than that? Okay, so we have a big cross-the-board kind of look at what we do. Alright, so... No, okay. So, currently, so we're talking about risks and welfare and all that sort of business. What's our greatest risk for our athletes or ourselves if we're participating in sport?
Death.
Yeah, that's the biggest one, isn't it? We cark it. And that has the greatest. So, what legs are the most dangerous out of the 3? Not the left or the right, as in the swim, bike, run.
Depends on the weather.
Could be.
Swim.
Yeah, most people die in the swim.
Yeah.
And a bit because I guess if we get into trouble on the bike or the run, we can either stop or pull over and someone sees us, but often we could get clocked in the head or go under in the swim, we don't get found and all that sort of business. So yeah, far more deaths occur in the swim because I guess we think about big crashes and things on the bike and things like that, but that's where our greatest risk lies. So generally as a sport, whether we're an official, whether we're a coach or other things, how do we mitigate our risks? What do we have in place, or what do we do to mitigate our risks? Rules, yes, absolutely. Rules and regulations, because most of those rules and regulations are about, I mean, granted some of it's about fairness and not gaining unfair advantage and all that, but a lot of them are also about safety, aren't they? And underpinning it all, you know, the barring plugs. I think a few months ago there was, I think it was a 6-year-old kid in the States that got caught and died. So, yeah. So it's not just because we feel like being a tool on the day and making people's lives hard. There's actually a reason why we do it, because people have ended up dead from it. So what other things do we do as coaches, officials, athletes to mitigate our risk? Warm up.
Educate.
Yes, education. So we either educate ourselves as an official, or you definitely educate yourself as a coach as well, don't you? You know, some of that will depend on what you do. So there's lots of ways that we go about mitigating our risk, but of course we can't be foolproof the whole time either. I'm going to give you 2 mini examples of mitigating risks where it does and where it does sometimes work, and sometimes we just have lady luck on our side. Okay, so Carry Valley, a few years ago, we had a very near miss at Carry Valley, where somebody was pulled out of the water, blue and unconscious. We had water safety in play. We recommended wetsuits. We had what we thought was everything in there, but of course when we boiled it down and looked at it closer, we had 16-year-old kids on paddle boards in brackish, non-salinated water. And you're not going to have you're not going to have a teenager be able to pull up a grown adult from the bottom of a lake. So there was a bit of luck on our sides with that, and the fact that a fairly strong open age group athlete. There was people on the jetty that saw him go down and screaming and yelling and and one of the boys raced over and helped pull him up, and then got him onto a board and pulled him into the shore. And then there was myself and one of our other club members. It was a doctor that happened to be there to receive him, and I thought, oh yeah, bloody who, I'm going to be doing CPR on somebody with an audience of 300. Yay. But it was an absolute miracle that he was just blue and unconscious, and as he got out, started to breathe, he picked up, woke up, and was okay. So if that had happened on the other side of the lake, where he wasn't seen by spectators, we might have had a very, very different outcome. So as a consequence to that, our recommended wetsuit swim is now compulsory. Our water safety, what we thought we had it ticked off, is just ridiculous now. It's big, grown, bulky blokes on jet skis, and there's almost a surf ski out there for every 3 swimmers. So we put our water safety on roids, because it's really, really, who's done Carrot Valley? Yeah, you can literally stand in the water up to your knees and you can't see your feet. That's how brackish it is. So so that was luck, and so we've absolutely modified what we do with that, and we thought we dotted I's and crossed T's, and we look back on that and realise that that we could do more. So that's all about, we always need to evolve our practice, and if you ever have anything happen. And the other one, of course, was a death we had, a team swimmer down at Busselton in 2014. And of course that was a really, really cold weekend, and we as a part of the race contingency meeting, I won't go into massive details, but when we look back on that, we had done absolutely anything and everything that we could have possibly have done, and if that man was going to survive, he had every single opportunity to have done so. Because of the cold and other things that we put in place, there was paramedics on the shore waiting for him. So looking back at that, was a terrible outcome, an absolute tragedy, but there was nothing more we could have done to change that outcome. So the first one, good outcome, Lady Luck was on our side, and then the second one was a terrible outcome, but there was nothing really to reflect upon that we could have done differently. And it gives it an example of what sort of scenarios you can be faced and outcomes can be different. Okay. Alright, so there's an awful lot that we need to think about. So, concussion, we'll talk about. So a lot of it is, so out of you guys that have done your training and whatever, who's done a senior first aid course? You've done a 2-day, okay, you keep updated with it? Okay, yeah, but of course, you're not a healthcare professional either, are you? But if you haven't done it, then I would recommend you do it and maintain your skills with it. Who's had to use it? Who's had to use actually the basic life support side of it? Yeah, a couple of you. Yeah, it's very scary. And I had to, and I do a lot of teaching of it in hospitals, and I've used it just as many times outside the hospital as I have inside the hospital. So it's still a good thing to learn. So we're going to just broadly go over some really basic stuff, and feel free to chip in and stuff as well. So one of the things is concussion. So it's a big thing, and of course concussion is probably the mildest form of a head injury. And of course you have far more severe, and that young lady that the AFLW lady, that young woman that died the other day, and she ended up with a massive head injury, and can come on really, really quickly. So what sort of circumstances would we think that we may come across a concussion or potential concussion? Bike crash, absolutely. It's probably our main. I mean, I guess we technically could in the swim, if we get clocked in the head by someone else's arm or elbow, or kicked in the head when we're drafted, tapping on their toes, and somebody kicks us in the head. So, what does concussion look like? What are they? How, if we're either suspected or even a higher level of concussion, what do they look like to us?
Dazed.
Maybe dazed? Yep. Disorientated, yeah. What other things?
Nausea can be three.
Nausea, or even worse than that, vomiting.
Yeah.
How do you know if someone's disoriented?
Not walking straight. Not walking straight.
Yeah.
Their eyes are a bit glazy.
Where am I? Where am I? Where am I?
Yeah. But sometimes if you're trying to ascertain whether they are, ask them questions, but ask them really quite specific questions. How are you, mate? Fine. Might need to probe just a little bit more. Ask him, do they know where they are? Do they know who they are? What do they have for breakfast? Can't ask them anymore who the Prime Minister is. Unfair question. But you need to be a lot more specific. So if you guys are out in a coaching session and you're worried about if somebody had a crash and you're worried about them having concussion, how do you make the decision about whether to send them to hospital or not?
Send us.
If in doubt,
Worry.
do it.
Send us.
Absolutely.
It's not worth the risk.
So the one question you need to really ascertain is, have they had a loss of consciousness? And if they've had a loss of consciousness, it's an absolute no-brainer. You must send them to hospital. Okay? So, can you remember absolutely everything that happened? Oh, I don't know what, or if there was any witnesses. And if they blacked out or whatever, but even for a really short period of time, and you think they're okay, then just, any loss of consciousness, off they go. Okay? And then of course any of those other sort of signs of that disorientation or not knowing who they are, headaches, double vision. What might go hand in glove with a concussion if you're talking about coming off a bike?
Physical injury.
Yeah, so you might have other injuries, but what's the one we're really worried about?
Cracked helmet.
You might end up with a cracked helmet, and that be another something that gives you another cause for suspicion.
Back injury.
Neck, yeah, particularly your C-spine. Like you can injure your back anywhere, of course, but the one that is potentially catastrophic is higher up in your C-spine, in your cervical spine. So we have to be really, really careful. So if somebody comes off their bike within the within the realms of cake, we need to try to have them not jump up and down and run around and all that sort of business. What under sort of circumstances might that be tricky?
Right in the middle of the course where there's people coming.
If by not moving them is potentially going to expose them to more danger than moving them. So you need to so we need to get them off hot roads and out of and also who else are we protecting? Ourselves. So we have to have a very, very strong self-preservation streak. And there's been instances of that. A few years ago there was somebody that stopped to help somebody on the freeway with a car broken down. Then they got done as well. So you have to be really, really careful and look after yourself as well. So you need to be really, really mindful of concussion and have a very low threshold for calling for help. If they don't seem too bad or you don't worry about it, what circumstances might you suspect or be worried that they may develop it later?
When someone partially drowns. Oh, I see that one. Okay.
No, when they've hit their head.
Yeah, so I think if they, particularly if they're talking about cracked helmets and things like that. I always love it when people go, "Oh, helmets don't do any good."
Trust me, they do.
I say bollocks to that because, people say that there's been no reduction in head injuries. But there's been over the last however many years, 4-5-fold increase of people buying bicycles versus cars. So if you're not having an increase in head injuries, but you've got 4 or 5 times more people riding bikes, you do the math. And of course, you can never ever collect the data of what doesn't happen. You can only collect the data of what does happen. And I reckon all of us in the room, if it hasn't been ourselves, we know somebody that's walked away from a stack with a cracked helmet and not had to go to hospital. So that's what it's really. But so what about if somebody had a cracked helmet and they have that, but they seem okay and how can you maybe mitigate anything potentially going pear-shaped down the other end, or like a delayed response?
Cracked helmets. I'd still be sending them to the hospital.
If the symptoms we've just been talking about show up.
What if they're symptom-free? What if they're symptom-free?
If the symptoms show up later, we would be warning them about it. Any of these symptoms show up, then you need to take yourself to.
Yeah. So if they really do seem okay, but there's no harm in sending them off anyway, but you're never going to send them off alone.
No.
You're always going to make sure they're with a responsible adult, and you're going to have them look out for things. If you get a headache, double vision, start feeling sick, throwing up, all those sorts of things, get to hospital immediately. And if there's been any of those signs, you can't have you guys go back out on a course or go back out into a training session until they've been cleared by a medical professional. But it's probably the most severe of injuries that you can think about. Bones, and muscles, and ligaments and tendons. It may destroy our sporting lives and careers, but we generally won't die from them. But head injuries are another ball game again. Any questions on concussion or any specific?
Do you want that concussion slide back up? Or the not?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So hypothermia. Are we at risk of getting hypothermic here in Australia? Subtropical Perth, lovely Perth?
Yeah.
That's because some of you buggers are too freaking skinny. I'm never hypothermic. Okay, so people think that you can't get hypothermic because we live in a lovely warm environment, but of course most of us we know otherwise, don't we? So we've got hypothermia. So what circumstances have some of you guys? So Carrie Valley, you talked again a few years ago when it was wet, cold, windy, and of course most of them have a very low BMI and not wearing much, and then come out of a pool, a swim, stay wet, keep wet, and get more wet. Okay, so we can get it. So, and what other circumstances some of us have probably either been in that situation ourselves, or certainly have buddies. The big one in Perth, that's a real issue with hypothermia. The Rotto swim, absolutely. And can you die from hypothermia? Yep, you sure can. How do we recognise it? There's degrees of hypothermia, isn't there? Got mild, moderate, severe. Of course, there's degree cut-offs, 35 degrees mild and 30, but we don't have a temperature, we don't have a thermometer, and if we're going to get a proper temperature, we're going to get a core temperature, so you're not going to stick a thermometer up your athlete's bottoms. Okay? Although I have known that to happen in a medical tent in the Ironman. But generally speaking, we're not going to do it. So how would our athletes look, or ourselves?
Blue.
Maybe blue, probably not though.
Shivering.
Okay, shivering. Okay, so it's a classic. So I had a colleague that was at the Rottnest Channel swim on the other side, and somebody come off and yep, they're okay. They're not even shivering.
Doesn't always.
So shivering and feeling cold and being cold and peripherally shut down, that's really your mild to moderate hypothermia. Okay, and so shivering is good in the fact that it's our way of making our muscles twitch and to generate our own body heat. That's how our body tries to compensate for it. We also get really, really cold around the edges, and that's all about constricting our blood vessels to keep all the blood flow to our central organs. So if we can't shiver anymore,
then you're in trouble.
We're in big trouble, really big trouble. Because now you've lost that physiological capability of trying to warm yourself up. So you're actually in big trouble. What else can happen if we're hypothermic?
I got it in Carrie Valley, and you get really hot. So they were trying to put blankets on me, and I was ripping them off. And you're dazed and confused. I actually do not remember it.
Yeah.
So I don't remember how
absolutely.
I got into the ambulance with the paramedics.
Yeah. It can absolutely affect somebody's dentition, which is also why, I've done paddle support a few times with the Rottnest guys, and and I'll ask them questions like, "What's your wife's middle name?" Most of them won't know that. And their birthday, and so really specific questions, not "How you going, mate?" So that mentition and their brain function on whether they're cloudy or not, what kilometre mark are you, love? I've got to ask them really specific questions. So confusion is really, really important to ascertain. You can also get quite, initially you might get a little bit higher blood pressure, but eventually you can get quite low blood pressure. What also happens if you get extremely hypothermic?
Physically, you can do silly things.
Like? You can do very silly things.
Like wobble around and not be able to balance properly.
Yeah, that's also along the, yeah, so it's a lack of coordination as well, but it's also that lack of, mental awareness.
Slurred speech, I mean, when you
Yep.
get really cold, your jaw doesn't work, so you can't.
Yeah, but that's sometimes just because I do that on a cold morning on the road. That's just because my jaw's frozen. But
Just
You can
lie
actually
down and you don't want
you
to
can
go
get
anywhere.
really, really bradycardic. Your heart rate can go really, really slow.
Okay.
Really, really, really slow. You can also get heart rhythm problems. And if it gets too slow and the heart rhythm gets too nasty, you can really do quite a good impersonation of dead. Okay, so you need to be really, really careful of that. So that's, progresses on. So ideally, we would spot somebody that was mild to moderately hypothermic before they got severely hypothermic. How can we turn them around, or what can we do?
More fluids,
More
more
what?
water, drink.
Don't give them hot water.
Tinfoil blankets.
Okay, common response. Does a tinfoil blanket warm you up?
Stops the. Yeah.
It might stop you getting colder, and it might protect you from the wind, but it does not warm you up. What's the first thing you should do?
Yeah.
Take
Get
their
away the wet clothes
Yeah,
off.
you get them out of the wet environment for a start. Try to get them out of any wind. But the thing is, yeah, so getting their wet, soggy clothing off them is good, but only if you've got something dry to put on. Okay, don't take the wet, soggy clothes off and then leave them. Okay, so if you don't have something warm and dry to put on to replace the wet, soggy stuff, then at least insulate them from getting any colder. Okay, so what about eating and drinking and fluids and things like that?
Warm fluids.
Yeah, but warm, but not hot.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's really tepid to warm. What about putting them in a warm bath? No. Okay, so you need to insulate them, keep them dry, and then So, but also, if their conscious level is reduced, you can't go getting them to drink stuff. They can't protect their own airway and stuff. So it's only if they're able to, eat and drink and talk and all that sort of business, they're going to give them anything to eat and drink. But certainly, but definitely get them out of the environment and get them the heck off to hospital as well. And so how do we? We know that those space blankets, those silver blankets, they don't warm them up. But how else can we warm them up?
Body hair.
Blankets.
Oh, yeah, just give them a big snuggle. I might get you labour for sexual harassment. That's okay.
If you save their life, it might be okay.
Yes, exactly. So you can, body to body warmth. You can use, you can use hot packs and things like that, but you have to do it really, really carefully and gently and have it well wrapped in, because you've got, skin that's had a reduced blood supply and stuff because it's really, really cold. So you have to be really, really careful that you don't get any, any heat injury and burns as well, and that just adds insult to injury. So you have to be really, really careful with that sort of environment. So just be very, very careful with that. Anything to add with hypothermia?
So do we want to have a break and then we can go on to the other area? Have a sandwich break first, or do you want to keep going? It's up to you.
Should finish the hypothermia.
Alrighty, we've got hyperthermia. How do we know? On what sort of circumstances are we going to get hyperthermia?
Hot days.
Hot days? Long races?
High humidity.
Yep, dehydration exacerbates it. So how are they going to present? Maybe. Yep.
Nauseous.
Are they can you say like predisposed to it? Like, is there like a European like they're really white?
I don't know necessarily, but if they're not used to it, they may suffer. Like I know that when we had the long course world champs here in 2009, it was a really, really hot day. The Poms and Kiwis that killed them. But I don't necessarily. I don't think they were necessarily more unwell. They can't. Yeah, they just.
Complain.
Yeah.
They're a thermostat.
Yeah. But so yeah, we can acclimatise to it to a degree. But so what happens when we get hyperthermic? What happens to us?
Yeah, overheating.
Overheating.
Yeah, again, we get disorientated, our conscious level goes,
Heart rate goes up.
yeah, it will go up.
Muscle cramps.
Yep. And to the extreme beyond that, you can actually get muscle tissue damage.
Really?
Yeah.
You die.
Yeah. And rhabdomyolysis even, and then that clogs up kidneys, and it's actually, can you die from hypothermia?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's heat exhaustion or heat stress, and then there's heat stroke. Okay? So kind of 40 degrees mark is the cut-off between one and the other. And once you start getting to heat stroke, that's when you're at great risk of death and convulsions and not being able to picture in airway, and yeah, it's really, really nasty. And you cook muscle tissue, all sorts of problems, electrolyte disturbances, and that's incredibly life-threatening. So if we have to stop them getting colder and warm them up when they're getting cold, what do we do when they're too hot?
Yeah.
Not rocket science, is it? So you need to. So again, it's a common theme with things. Somebody's mentition and their ability to think is really, really important, and ascertaining their ability to think. Because if they can't think clearly, then they're also going to make a stupid mistake like run into a pole or trip over something or come off their bike, or those other the sequelae of not having their wherewithals with them. So you have to be really, really mindful of that. So what might you do? What else might you do as a first aid sort of measure?
Give them water.
Yeah, give them water. But again,
Get
they
them
have
out
to
of the sun.
they have to be able to do it. If they're semi-conscious, you can't get them to do that.
Get them out of the sun.
Get them out of the sun. Damp cloth, spray them with water, that sort of thing. Again, you don't want to go immersing them in bodies of, it has to. You can't do anything to the extreme because it just shocks the body too much.
To a friend of ours in Bintan in 2016, when she finished, she hopped in a cold bath, and then she came out, felt fine, and then she just slowly deteriorated after that.
Yep.
And had to get wheeled away.
Yeah. The problem is that if it's much better to pick up that somebody doesn't quite have their faculties with them before they do something silly, like in a bath, and then, but if they pass out in a bath and no one's in the bathroom with them, then they drown. So it can have really awful consequences out the other end. Going back to concussion as well. There was a young lady at when was it? At the last a couple of 70.3s ago.
Oh yeah, so one of the top athletes who finished higher, there was a penalty. She had to sit in front of the competition jury, and she couldn't explain how her race had gone at all. And she had crashed during the bike course, and she got back on her bike. She'd done the full run. During the jury, Steve would remember this. We kept asking her questions, and she kept asking us the same questions again. And we were like, hold on, we've explained that, and she goes, have you? Yeah, and then so we immediately sent her off to the medics, and she was suffering from
Concussion.
Yeah.
So the inability to think straight and function properly cerebrally is a really, really good indicator for getting somebody looked at very, very urgently. But yeah, so you need to be mindful that you don't do anything extreme, and you don't leave them unattended if anybody is unwell. And because drowning in a bath later on or something like that is not a good look.
Yeah. Kathy will remember this. 2 years ago on the Gold Coast, some of you may have seen it on television, Johnny Brownlee bounced off the barriers and then came across the line and collapsed. The medical team probably weren't as prepared as they should be, so they put him in an ice bath. And the ice bath had like soft walls, so he passed out. And then as his head went down, the water flowed over his nose into his mouth, and like he was absolutely. And this is like a very important athlete, maybe not to us, but some countries it is. And that was just simply a medical team not thinking. He was left on his own, so they put him in, and then they walked away, and he just collapsed. And then his head dropped the sidewall, and the water just flew over like a river. And his brother had just walked up. don't know what his name is, Alistair or something. And he was the one who picked him up and said, what the hell is going on here? Yeah, because Johnny was out cold and water had gone into his everywhere. Yeah. So split second and he was in trouble.
Beware the semi-conscious, because they can turn fully unconscious. Alright, we'll have a quick break then and
Yeah.
get back to it.
Yeah. So